Chapter 12. "How's intercession?" Melody asked over the phone the next Tuesday. It was the 28th of May. Only 2 days until school was out for the summer, and still he hadn't really made up his mind about the whole babysitting thing. She was trying to let him decide on his own, but it wasn't easy. "Stressful. My finals in 3 days, and I haven't even started studying for it yet." "Oh, well, then maybe I should let you go." "No." The word was sharp, like a cry of someone who's fallen off a cliff. Sanity right now would be a very good thing. Her sanity? She laughed. "Funny, I never thought of myself as the sane one in this relationship." "Are you kidding? Without you, I'd probably taken a rocket ship to the moon by now." "Rocket ship to the moon, huh? That could be interesting." The smile that lit her heart every time she got the chance to spend time with him spread through her. "How's Dylan?" Ready to get out. They cleaned their desks with shaving cream today. Don't ask. I think the teacher's got issues." Melody let that drift into oblivion. "How's your mom?" His sigh was hard. "Out. She left a while ago for who knows where." What could she say? Nothing would make his situation more livable. She wanted to ask again about the younger Donovan brother, but she was starting to sound like a broken record. "How's work?" "Not bad, actually. I talked to Eve today. She was telling me about this young adult group they have at her church. It sounded kind of cool, but I have no idea where I would fit that in." Just what about that statement was the worst? Melody had no idea. Eve, church, young adult group. She'd never been big on church, and as far as she could tell, it was a waste of a perfectly good hour of sleep on Sunday. Still, she liked how it lifted his voice. Nothing else seemed to. Nonetheless, she couldn't keep the trepidation from her voice. "So, are you going to join?" Even asking hurt. If he joined the church group, it was a pretty certain bet that he'd find some sweet young adult with a 20-inch waist and a 15-pound Bible. Melody had neither. She ran her fingers through her hair that felt like dead weeds. 6 strands came out with emotion, and she lifted them up to examine them. That had been happening a lot lately. At this rate, she'd be bald by summer. She reached over and flicked the hair into the trash can. "No, I just don't have the time right now. But I'd love to join a Bible study somewhere." He paused. "You probably think the religion stuff is stupid, but I don't know. It's really not so bad when you give it a chance." He could give it a chance for the both of them. Even Blaine Donovan wouldn't talk her into becoming a Bible freak. She decided to change the subject. "So, have you decided about Dylan on Monday? I'm talking to Nathan tomorrow about my summer schedule." Her voice had lost much of the patience and some of the kindness. Truth was, she was tired. With 2 successive clunks, she slipped off the shoes she had had on since 7 that morning. Something to eat and a shower sounded like a very good idea. Again he sighed. "I went by the daycare place today. It was a madhouse. They've got little babies through 12-year-olds, and I don't know which were worse. I just hate the thought of leaving him in that chaos all day." "How much is it a week?" $160 a week, no matter if he comes or not." She waited for him to decide in her favor. "I don't know. There's just not a good answer." The barb went through her, slicing every tender spot there. She ran her fingers through her hair again and came out with another 5 strands. Frowning, she reached over and dropped them in the trash. Maybe she needed a different kind of shampoo or conditioner. The ones she was using certainly weren't doing the trick anymore. "Were you really serious?" Blaine finally asked, and she sat forward at the worry in his voice. "Do you think I would have offered if I wasn't serious?" "Well, I don't know." A moment, and he sighed. "Maybe we could try it for a week and see how it goes. But if it's not working for you, for any reason—" "You sure don't have much faith in me, do you?" "I just don't want to overload you. Taking care of a kid is a lot of work." She smiled. "How about you let me worry about that?" And so, Monday morning, Blaine found himself walking a rather reluctant Dylan up her sidewalk. He still had his doubts about whether this was a good idea, but the truth was, his heart simply wouldn't let him take any of the other options. "Good morning," Blaine said when Melody opened the door, looking shower-fresh. With minimal makeup, the freckles across her nose were clear. "Hope we're not too early." "No, not at all. Come on in." She stepped back and let them through the opening. Blaine walked all the way into the living room. He still liked this house. It was cozy and warm, and the thought that Dylan would be spending time here, with her, made much of the trepidation slide away. "Here's his backpack. I put microwave mac and cheese in it. There's some toys and an extra shirt." He handed it to her and watched as she examined the contents. "I get off about 5, so I should be back here by 5:30. If you need me, call Harmon's and have them page the men's department." She nodded and then looked up at him. "We'll be fine." Her gaze fell to Dylan and she held her hand out to him. "Won't we, bud?" Looking back and forth between them, Dylan took her hand and stepped to her side. Blaine stood looking at them, trying to find the courage to leave them here like this. "If you need anything." "We'll call." Melody nodded, and then her smile drifted to her eyes. "We'll be fine, Blaine. We promise." "Well, okay, if you're sure." "We're sure." Melody stood at the door watching Blaine drive away. Then she shut the door and turned to Dylan, who looked half asleep. "How about some breakfast? What do you like?" His gaze up at her was dark and slightly frightened. "Come on." She held her hand out for him. "Let's go see what we've got." Slowly his small hand came up into hers. She didn't know how much God would even care to hear, but she breathed a quick prayer anyway. Somehow she had to make this work. Good intentions only, in this situation, wouldn't be enough, and she knew it. All morning long, Blaine thought about calling. It was driving him crazy. He shouldn't have agreed to this. Of course, he would be worried about Dylan no matter where he left him, but this was more stress than he had bargained for. "Looks good," Eve said, striding into the break room at just after noon. Blaine looked down at the tuna sandwich he hadn't so much as tasted. "You have very low standards." She grabbed her lunch from the refrigerator and brought it to the table. Putting her apple to one side, she looked at him. "So, how's it going? Did you survive intercession?" Barely. I think I squeaked by with a B. By the hand of God, I assure you." "He's pretty good about stuff like that." Blaine bit into a chip. "No kidding." "So, you're off for what, then? A week?" "No such luck. My online opened this morning, and my in-school starts tomorrow night. Tuesday and Thursday through July." "Wow, nothing like a killer schedule." He shook his head. "You have no idea." His thoughts went again to Melody, who had insisted that she keep Dylan until Blaine was out of class on Tuesdays and Thursdays as well. It was crazy. She didn't know what she'd agreed to. "You're awfully far away," Eve said, gazing at him. "What's going on?" He hadn't told her for fear of all the repercussions it could cause. Shaking his head, he let his gaze fall to his barely touched sandwich. After a moment, his gaze came up to hers. "If I tell you something, do you promise not to tell AJ?" Concern crowded her features. "Why?" "Because it's about Mel, and I know he'll flip out and think I'm the worst person on the planet if he knows." Concern layered over the previous concern. "Why? What's going on?" With a small breath to settle the decision to tell her, Blaine let it all out. Well, most of it anyway. He skipped the part about his crummy living conditions and his mother. That part was just too hard to admit. But he told her about Dylan and the daycare situation, and Melody, and how he wished there was another option, but he couldn't find it. Eve never flinched, just sat, listening. When he finished, Blaine looked at her. "Do you think I'm making a mistake?" She gathered her words carefully. "I think that you are very, very lucky. Melody is a wonderful person, very sweet and caring. I know she and I didn't hit it off right away, but I know by the stories AJ's told me that you are not going to find a more loyal friend." I think God gave you this solution, and you should trust Him that He has a plan." Blaine nodded. "I've been reading about that a lot. Jeremiah 29:11 and all that." "It's true." Her gaze fell to her perfectly manicured nails. "Sometimes it might not feel like it, but it's true." For some odd reason, Blaine felt the need to ask who they were talking about, but he beat that thought back. It wasn't like she was in great need of faith to follow God's plan. What did Eve have to doubt God's love and wisdom over now? She was married to the second love of her life, and their lives were perfect. He brushed the feeling to the side. "I'll try to remember that." "What do you say? How does going to the park for a picnic sound?" Melody asked Dylan, who had been playing quietly on the floor with his tiny trucks and cars. He looked up at her, and a feeling that could only be described as love gushed through her. "How about it? We can make peanut butter and jelly for you and iced tea for me." She put her hand down to him, and after only a moment's hesitation, he reached up and put his hand in hers. The day had been perfect, but for how quiet Dylan was. That worried her. He'd never said more than 10 words altogether in her presence anyway, but somehow she had assumed when it was just the two of them, he'd be more talkative. She was wrong. Desperate to break through the wall around him, she glanced at him as she gazed up at the sky. "Let's see what shapes the clouds are today," she said, lying back on the denim patchwork quilt spread across the soft blanket of grass. It took her a moment to get comfortable. However, he didn't really move. Hoping she could get some response, she looked up at the clouds drifting lazily by. "Look," she pointed up at one. "It's an elephant." A second and a half, and Dylan followed her finger upward until his eyes narrowed in skepticism. "Don't you see it? See, there's the trunk, and there's the big ears. See?" "It looks like a cat." "What? A cat?" She ratcheted her shoulders around. "Where?" Carefully, Dylan lay down next to her and pointed up. "See, its ears are kind of pointed, and its long tail." "Tail? That's the elephant's trunk." "Nah, elephants aren't that skinny." "Maybe he's on a diet." Dylan scrunched his nose and shook his head. "Elephants don't go on diets. Only girls do that." The comment intrigued her. "Oh, yeah. How do you know that?" "All the girls in my class," he said as if it was exasperating. "They want to look like the girls in the magazines at the store." "And that's a bad thing?" He shrugged. "I think you should look the way you look, not the way everyone else does." It sounded so simple and so heartfelt, Melody wanted to hug him. "Oh, look, it's a boat." Melody looked where he was pointing. "See, I told you. You are good at this game." It wasn't hard to see the smile on his face when she looked over. He really was a cute little kid. The memory of her watching as he got out of the car, having to roll the window down to open the door, drifted relentlessly over Blaine even as he drove home with Dylan. It had been a long day, and he had more to do once he got home. However, nodding off was not in question, as Dylan was intent on telling him every single thing they did all day. "And then we went to the park, and Melody found this thing in the clouds. She thought it was an elephant, but it wasn't. It was a cat. And then I found this giant head with a mouth and a nose and an eye. She never could see it, so she finally gave up and said I was the winner." Blaine glanced over. "So you like Melody, then?" "Uh-huh. We made peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and she let me lick the knife. But it was okay. It was one of those not dangerous kind. Tomorrow, she said we're going to go play on a playground she knows about. She said there's a tunnel thing we can crawl in that goes under some water." Soft gratefulness brushed Blaine's heart. He was going to have to thank her. In 9 years, he had never seen Dylan quite like this. By Friday, when Melody got to the burger joint with Dylan, her love for the child was set. She watched as he ran across the restaurant to Blaine to show his big brother the masterpiece they'd spent most of the afternoon coloring. It wasn't elaborate, but it wasn't bad either. She sauntered over to the table where Blaine already had their food. "Hey," he said, looking up at her with soft appreciation. Her hand was tucked in her back pocket, and pushing up on it, she arched her shoulder and smiled shyly. "Hey, sorry we're late. We had to stop for gas." "Not a problem. I hope you wanted salad. I took a shot." He turned it around for her.
"We went out to the park today and fed the ducks," Dylan said, chomping into his burger like a ravenous lion.
He took a drink.
"You should have seen them. They were like quacking and honking, and one about got me, but Melody shooed it away."
"Honking?" Blaine asked skeptically as she sat down. Melody shrugged as she stuck her fork in the salad. There were a couple of geese. Quite the gathering, I assure you. "So, ducks, geese, and the park all in 1 week? However will you top yourself next week?" Blaine's gaze was at once appreciative and teasing. Dylan's not going to ever want to go back to school. The thought that had been floating in her brain for 3 days sifted again into her consciousness. She glanced over at Dylan and decided it wouldn't hurt to at least start the conversation. "I was thinking about taking him to the library on Monday. I've got some research to do there, and maybe he can check out some books." Instantly, the protest jumped to Blaine's eyes. She held up her hand. On my card. And the books would stay at my house so they wouldn't get lost. But he says he doesn't like to read much." A fog of quiet guilt drifted over Blaine's face. They wanted him to read every night from school, but he didn't always get that done. It wasn't hard to see why. She knew enough of Blaine's schedule to know he hardly made it home in time to do his own work, much less monitor his brother's. She took a tiny sip of water to settle the first suggestion. Then she plunged ahead. "I figured as much." Setting the glass down, she paused a mere moment. "I was also thinking about getting some flashcards for addition and subtraction." This time the concern drained all the way down Blaine's face. "Why?" Melody shrugged. "I used to babysit for a girl a couple summers ago. She was about Dylan's age, and she could rattle off the answers to stuff like nobody's business." She glanced at Dylan, measuring her words for his ears carefully. "I want Dylan to be able to do that in the fall." A moment, and then another, as Blaine played with a French fry under his finger. "I don't—" He glanced up at her, and then let his gaze fall. It slid over to Dylan, and then back to his cup. "I mean, I'm pretty stretched for babysitting as it is." Suddenly Melody caught his meaning. "No, oh no, I didn't mean you had to pay for them. We could make them on my computer for all that's worth. I just meant, well, I wanted to make sure it was all right with you if I worked with him like that a little bit." The explanation didn't really do much to ease his tension. "I hate to ask you to do that. You're already doing so much." But she only smiled. "Dylan's a great kid. We're just looking for good productive things to keep us busy. Isn't that right, bud?" His mouth stuffed with hamburger and fries, Dylan nodded enthusiastically. Blaine's eyes said thank you in a million ways. "Did I ever tell you that you are a godsend?" Despite the reference, she smiled. "I'm trying." "And she's teaching him math? And they're reading together, like hours and hours every day," Blaine said in marked admiration to Eve 3 weeks later as they sat in the break room at noon. "And Dylan just loves her. She's all he talks about. Melody did this, and Melody said that. Now I'm getting worried about what happens when he has to go back to school." Eve's dark eyes surveyed him. "What?" he asked defensively, sensing that his rendition had somehow revealed things he wasn't sure he was ready for anyone to see. "You," she said simply. "It's nice to see you so happy and carefree." "Carefree?" he snorted. "I wish. I've got summer finals coming up, and I'm scheduled for a double shift tomorrow." She shook her head. "No, I don't mean work and school. I mean deeper than that. You aren't afraid like you used to be." "Oh, trust me, there's still plenty of fear to go around." Then he stopped and really listened to his heart. "But I know Dylan is taken care of. I know he's with someone who loves him as much as I do. That takes some of the pressure off." Nodding, she smiled. "I can tell." He paused a moment, not really realizing there was one. Then his gaze went up to her. "So, how about you? How's things at Newlywed Central?" It wasn't that he wanted to hear play-by-play about her life with AJ, but he sensed it was rude to never even ask. Rather than answering, Eve let out a long, slow breath and corkscrewed her face as if she might burst into tears. The battle continued as he watched in gathering concern. Finally, Blaine sat up, leaning forward as he put his hand on her wrist. "Hey." He lowered his gaze, trying to snag hers. "What's up?" She said nothing for a long moment, and then shook her head.
"I'm still not pregnant."
That pulled his hand off hers. "And that's a problem?"
"Well, we wanted kids right away. We've both wanted a big family, and with me getting older all the time, we didn't want to wait."
When she looked at him, there were tears lining her lashes.
"But for some reason, it's just not happening."
She shook her head and ran her fingers under her eyes.
"I don't know. AJ's trying to be okay about it, but I know he's worried too."
Man, this really wasn't his place, except that she was his friend, and she was obviously hurting. "Well, have you been to a doctor or something to see?" She shrugged, flashed an ironic smile, and then set her jaw.
"My annual checked out, no problems, nothing they can see that's wrong."
With everything in him, Blaine did not want to be in this conversation for so many reasons he couldn't name them all. "What about AJ? Has he been—" This was impossible. If he was AJ, the last thing he'd want to do was to go to some doctor to be told there was something wrong with him that would break her heart.
"He's scheduled for Friday after July 4th, but—"
"You don't think he'll go?" Her gaze jumped to his.
"Oh, no, I know he'll go. It's just—"
Blaine nodded. He understood her unspoken words perfectly. "Well, I can't say that I know it will do any good, but I can say some prayers." When she looked at him, the tears were there again. He stood and pulled her up into his arms where she laid her head on his shoulder. Gently, he stroked her hair. "It's going to be okay." After a moment, she pulled back, and his gaze caught hers. "Okay?" he asked, leveling his gaze at her.
"Okay,"
she finally said, and started to let go of him. Then she jerked him back.
"Please don't tell anybody, okay? I don't think AJ wants anybody to know."
It tore his heart out to see her so sad and scared. "I won't." Melody had quietly dropped out of her second semester summer school class. It was scheduled to start on Monday, 4 days after July 4th, but she wouldn't be there. Blaine had never brought up the question that the second summer session was about to start and what was she going to do about that, so she didn't either. They saw each other when he dropped Dylan off and again when he picked him up, and on Friday nights they saw each other for a couple of hours at the burger place. Beyond that, she knew he was terribly busy. He had to be. Working full-time and full-time summer school would kill an elephant. There were days he looked particularly stressed, days he'd showed up so tired she knew he hadn't gotten much sleep at all. She wished she could do more, but what could she do that she wasn't already? When she first dropped the class, she told herself she could sign up for an online something, but there weren't any of those she needed. So, in the end, she decided that a couple weeks off to just watch Dylan wouldn't kill her. The decision had sounded so perfectly logical, she never thought anyone would even question it. And with that, she forgot about it. On Tuesday, July 2nd, Blaine showed up looking dog-tired at almost 10:30 at night, long after the sun had gone down. His last final was now finished, but he looked far from enthusiastic about that.
"Wow, you look beat," she said as she gathered Dylan's things.
"Ha, that's one way to say it." He leaned against the wall separating the entry from the living room. Worry crashed into her.
"Are you going to be okay to drive?"
"Yeah." He nodded, looking like he might fall asleep at any moment. "How was he today?"
"Awesome, as usual. He's a great kid."
She wanted to tell him more, but now was not the time. Without really looking at anything, Blaine took the stuff from her grasp, stood to head for the door, and then remembered something. "Oh, yeah." He turned back and almost ran into her. "Eve invited us for the 4th. That lake house thing we went to last year." Like a porcupine, Melody's self-preservation quills went up. He hadn't talked about Eve in what seemed like forever. Somehow Melody had hoped they were no longer conversing. "Oh?" She glanced down at Dylan, whose hair she was stroking. "What are you going to do about—" She didn't want to ask in front of the child. Blaine's eyelids fell closed, and he yanked them open. "Oh, Eve said he's welcome. Jeff and Lisa's little Alex will be there. Maybe they can play." Rats, she wanted that to be a good excuse not to go. "Unless you don't want to go," he said slowly, clearly unsure he was even still awake by that point. Yes, that was it. She didn't want to go. But how could she say that? They were more her friends than his, and not wanting to go would certainly dredge up hurtful feelings somewhere. "No, that's fine. We can go. What time?" We're supposed to be there about 11:30 for lunch on Thursday." The smile she plastered onto her face hurt. "Sounds great." This has been For Real, Book 3, The Courage Series, written by Staci Stallings, narrated by Becky Dowdy. Copyright 2012 by Staci Stallings. Production copyright 2014 by Staci Stallings.
Like and subscribe to the Staci Stallings YouTube channel so you never miss a second of the story.